Happy New Year to you all. So our first SEAC meeting of 2024. I am Mary Wright. I'm the vice chair of SEAC. Our chair, Shelley Foster, is a little bit delayed, so she will be joining us momentarily, about 10 to 15 minutes or so. Okay, so first we would like to call to order our meeting. Okay, and I see we do have quorum, plus lots more, which is fantastic. And we would like to do number 2, so our acknowledgement of traditional territory. And I think that's a video.
The land upon which we work, live, and sustain ourselves is the ancestral and treaty lands of the Michizagig Anishinaabe, also known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit, the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land. We also recognize the rich pre-contact history and relationships, which include the Anishinaabe and the Ongwe Hongwe.
Since European contact, this land continues to be home to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As responsible community members, we value the diversity, dignity, and worth of all people.
Colonialism displaced and dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their ancestral land
and continues to deny their basic human rights, dignities, and freedoms.
We are committed to learning true history to reconcile, make reparations, and fulfill our treaty obligations to the original peoples and our collective responsibilities to the lands, water, animals, and each other for future generations.
Thank you for that. So we're going to move ahead to item number 3, which is the approval of the agenda. Last month's agenda. Anybody have any questions, comments? Everybody's good with the agenda? Can I get someone to approve?
Jeff.
Clark? No, Jeff. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Clark. And second? No, Mr. Lucas. All right. Thank you very much. So number 4 is declaration of conflict of interest. We have any? Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yes, yes. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Before we go there, 3.1, which is the authorization of the members' absence. Okay. So it is recommended that the absence of Sabona Afrocentric Circle of Support from consecutive Special Education Advisory Committee meetings, which is June to December 2023, be authorized. Background regulation 464/97, section 71B of the Education Act states that a member of the Special Education Advisory Committee vacates his or her seat if he or she absents himself or herself without being authorized by resolution entered in minutes from 3 consecutive regular meetings of the committee. Representative from Sambona Afrocentric Circle of Support has not attended June, September, October, November, December 2023 Special Education Advisory Committee meetings. So we would like to get approval.
So we're here tonight, we would like to authorize our absences so that we stay on.
Okay. So
Just ask for it.
okay, so we're asking for authorization of absence. Okay.
I just moved to put that on the floor, or is that?
So it's just a first and second?
First and second.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
First and second.
Okay.
And then.
Sure, no problem. Okay.
That's
That Barb
Yeah.
and seconded by Lieutenant. Okay, and then do we have everybody
Yeah.
approved? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. All right, so number 4, declaration of conflict of interest. Anybody? No hands, so that's good. And then number 5, approval of the minutes. This is quite 21. Yeah,
Sure.
okay. Mr. Bud, no approval, okay, and then seconded by Mr. Lucas. Yeah, we're just moving along here quickly. So delegations, do we have any delegations or public questions? I do not believe that we received anything. Okay, so then we are at number 7, reports from officials and staff. So 7.1 is the superintendent's oral.
Great, thank you, and through you, Chair. Good evening and Happy New Year. I'm delighted to be here with all of you today to share updates for the Special Education and Social Emotional Learning Department. Cecil has been conducting a review of literacy students with complex needs. We've developed a website with many additional links to resources that support and build on the strategy offered. On May 7th, 8th, and 9th, the Cecil staff will be providing a full day of professional learning and copies of this book to approximately 300 teachers of congregated classes for students with autism, developmental disabilities, and deaf and hard of hearing. The board and department is looking at expanding our partnership with William Osler Health System and beginning a partnership with Trillium Health Partners through our Education and Community Partnerships program to support children and adolescents with acute mental health needs who require intensive clinical support. We are currently in year 1 of the PDSB's 3-year mental health strategy. This strategy includes 3 priorities and deliverables under the PPM 169 released by the ministry in July of 2023. Our action plan for this academic year, which we shared with SEAC previously, identifies 3 priorities, including the creation of identity affirming and welcoming school and classroom environments, where all participants are represented and meaningfully intentionally included, prioritizing mental health and literacy promotion for all students in school environments, and building system capacity to understand that racism, ableism, homo and transphobia, classism, and other forms of discrimination impact the mental health and well-being of students, families, and staff. To facilitate the implementation of the 1-year action plan, we have multiple structures in place at PDSP, including a core mental health leadership group, a steering committee, and 4 advisory groups. The advisory groups are separated into students, parents, and caregivers, staff, and community partners. These structures ensure collaboration and opportunities for sharing feedback in the creation and implementation of the mental health strategy in the year of the action plan. School mental health has released mental health literacy modules for students in grades 7 and 8, and PDSB has raised a concern with the ministry that the modules are not accessible for students who are accessing the fully alternative curriculum. PDSB has expressed these concerns to the ministry. However, no new material have been provided. So in the interim, we prioritize this material for all students and have partnered with SeaC to support the creation of materials that are accessible to students in the ASD and DD population. The committee at SeaC is actively working on this, and we hope to provide these resources soon to educators. In response to the questions raised from our last SEAC meeting, I'd like to provide you the following in the way of a response. Kevin Wilson inquired about our partnership with LearnStyle and had heard that it had been canceled. We would like to share, Kevin, that PDSB continues to have a contract with LearnStyle. These contract includes 3 service areas: low incidence, high incidence, and SEA inventory software. PDSB is still using LearnStyle to facilitate student training of blind low vision software for students that would benefit. And PDSB is still using SEA inventory software to ensure that all students with approved SEA claims have their technology or mobility sensory equipment. Jennifer Knight inquired about the difference level of service between LearnStyle and Peel Assistive Technology Resource Teachers. During the past 3 academic years, LearnStyle were offering 3 hours of high incidence training, and the 3 hours were not always used by students as they did not want to be removed from their class to participate in the training. PDSB is using ATRTs to support students that would benefit from how to use their SEA device. ATRTs are able to continue to offer support for students with SEA technology, and the differentiated assistive technology training that we offer is one-to-one training, small group class training, co-planning and co-teaching with educators, virtual training, and asynchronous self-guided training. PDSB ATRTs also offer asynchronous options for training educators and parents. They can visit the www.pdsbt.net website and have different resources along with short engaging videos made by students to demonstrate how to use various AT tools for reading, writing, organization, research, and creating graphic organizers. The above service is not limited to 3 hours. The above model is available for continual training as sport and students grow and learn about the effective use of accessibility tools to access the curriculum. Our SEAR asks that all dates for IPRCs by exceptionality be brought to this meeting. I've copied these dates and made copies for each SEAC member that I can distribute later as requested. Our SEAR also asks how many students in grade 1 to 3 took the NGAT this year. There were 0 students in the grade 1 to 3 that were administered the NGAT this year. Our gifted screening using the NGAT was administered with grade 4 students throughout the board. Barb Sear also reported that she had connected Jack Neglieri, the developer of that NGAT, who indicated that the NGAT is designed for all 3 tests, quantitative, verbal, and nonverbal, to be administered. Students with math abilities are missed if the quantitative test is not administered. Last year's NGAT pilot indicated that the best screening data came from the verbal and nonverbal tests. And I wanted to draw your reference to SEAC minutes from March and June 2023, when the NGAT pilot was reviewed and the screening steps for this year's NGAT was discussed, including only the verbal and nonverbal tests. As referenced in the NGAT technical manual published by MHS, I quote, "As all components of the Neglieri general abilities test are meant to primarily assess general ability, each test score should be associated with the other test scores, such as performance on any single test is reasonably a predicament of performance on another. For each of the pairs of Neglieri's general abilities tests, these moderate to strong associations indicate that although each test assessed general ability from a different perspective, they are primarily measuring a common general ability." Our gifted resource teacher reached out to MHS, the test publisher, to get more information about the validity of not administering all 3 tests, and this was not raised as a concern when we were discussing year's implementation with them during the pilot phase. MHS has clearly shared that, quote, "The reliability and validity for each test was studied separately so that an ability score could be obtained from each separate measure." I'm happy to take any questions.
I have an email from Jack Neglieri. Awesome.
Through you, Chair. We're happy to take that email back and have a discussion with the people that we discussed, because it seems that we maybe are, I'll read what you have shared here, getting some conflicting information and come back to you.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions? Jennifer Rice.
Just wondering if it's possible to get your report in writing. It's a lot of information you give us each week, and it's even maybe the day before the meeting, so they have a chance to process this. And actually, for a lot of people, myself included, processing it, reading it, being able to see it, we all learn different ways, understand things different ways. So if we could get that in writing, that would be amazing.
For you, Chair. Absolutely, I can do that. I can also put the answer to these questions into our motion action log so that we are compiling and trying to be very responsive. These questions were all last meeting. We brought them all back this meeting. So for you, Chair, Ms. Knight, would it work for you to have them on the motion action log?
So yeah, it's great to have a motion action log, the answers to the question, but you bring a report each week, and it would be really helpful to have that ahead in writing. It doesn't have to be part of the package, because I know it's, we want to keep as most up to date data as we can. We used to get on a piece of paper as we came into the room. Okay, so that would be helpful, but even the day before the meeting. Okay,
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you for that. Did you have a question?
Just a comment.
Okay.
Superintendent Claudia, I just wanted to thank you for that. That was a lot to deliver in an oral report, and I thought it was quite well delivered, listening to the responses to every question. So thank you for the fulsome response. I look forward to reading it again in the action log, but I thought that was great. Thank you very much.
So we move for receipts of the oral report.
Second.
And all right, so now we're going to move on to 7.2, to the special education program pilot and reviews. And that would be that's the superintendent.
Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. We're very pleased to share with you some special education program pilots and reviews that we are going to be participating in for starting. We've already started some and throughout the remainder of the year. I want to also thank you because as you advocate in these meetings, many of the decisions that we came to about what to focus on was built upon feedback and comments made in this very room. And some very important and moving feedback about your own experiences and the experience of those people that you've served. So these pilots and program reviews that we're looking at are in response to not only the voice of SEAC, but the tremendous voice of the parent community that we serve, and most importantly, in response to students. Every decision we make in our department is to serve our most vulnerable students. And sometimes those decisions are challenging, but we always do so with a really discriminate focus on making sure that we're providing supports to the most vulnerable. So the first program that we are going to be looking at, if you can switch slides, thank you, is a pilot to the elementary communications class. Remembering that a pilot is just that, a review of existing practices to look at kind of how it could be approached in a really meaningful way. So we are going to look at a pilot that we started now and will be implementing for September. So the current program, as you know, the students are placed into contained classes with up to 8 students, where they receive explicit, systematic, and direct decoding instruction. It's a tier 3 short-term intervention that typically should be up to 2 years to remediate decoding and spelling skills and look at them to make sure that they can have those skills necessary to move forward. As the pilot structure, we are going to create clusters of students that will be housed in a homeschool, and they'll be integrated into a mainstream class, but they will still receive the exact same amount of direct reading instruction that they would have in the contained program. So students will still be pulled in groups of 8 based on their levels, and still get the support from a specialized reading instruction teacher. And then they will go back to the mainstream to make sure that they have access to mathematics, science, art, phys ed with their mainstream other mainstream students. Next page, please, are also looking at having additional supports in place. So on top of the communications cluster teacher, who is again trained in the Empower Tier 3, will have additional resource teachers that will be available to students to make sure that they're there to support the homeroom teacher in making modifications and accommodations to programming, as well as being given one-on-one support when needed for individual students. So it's a really comprehensive supportive program that allows us to ensure that students are integrated. Because what we have seen is that students are meant to be there for 2 years, and they start in grade 1 and they're streamed all the way to grade 8 and on into high school. So we needed to disrupt that and really look at the program itself and make sure that we give students every opportunity for the direct instruction they need in reading, which obviously we all can acknowledge of key importance, and making sure that we're able to integrate them and consider different pathways as they move forward to high school. Family engagement, communications for teachers and families has already been shared with families and went out in a memo and has sent a preliminary survey to families to ask them for their input about the benefits of the existing program and what they look forward to about the new program. We will be, throughout the pilot, accessing family voices, but most importantly, student voices. So we have a system in place that we're going to ask students in this year's communication class, and we're just working out how we would do this, hopefully through the teachers who they have a relationship with, what they're enjoying about the program. And then we will be continue in the new program to seek feedback from students and families. And then when we move from a pilot program into making more solid decisions about the long term, we will center the voices of and achievement of students, the feedback of families, and of course feedback from you as we bring those survey results back. Next, please. So project number 2 we're working on is commencing right now. We've already started, is a full book block 1 review. As you know, the Bach 1 program, as it is right now, offers programming to learners whose portraits may that looks at academic performance and the range of the primary grades, so kindergarten to grade 3. There's alternative goals requiring additional time and repetition to make sure they develop those new skills. Students are identified exceptional communication language impairment, intellectual impairment, or an MID, or have multiple exceptionalities. And it focuses on developing independent life skills as related to the workplace and the acquisition of basic literacy and numeracy skill. We offer programming in Bach 1 until students turn 21, and provides access to limited college programs based on the pathway. Next page, please. So what the review objectives are is that we really want to identify strengths and opportunities for improvement within the current program and practices. We want to ensure that we look at and identify and develop strong curricular support materials with levels of instruction and accountability for the teachers and the principals who are hosting these programs. We want to gather, again, responsive feedback from students, families, and guardians and educators. And I know we have some very passionate people around this table about who will contribute to that as well. And we want to review K-8 pathways for criteria for eligibility. An additional consideration is that we are hiring an acting special educational resource teacher. Have just finished interviews and will hopefully finish references and be making a job offer soon. Whose job will be to pilot and run this review. It'll be a 5-month term position, and will be instrumental in helping us create and guide the shift in programming. Okay, next page, please. We are also looking at a regional secondary communication program pilot, similar to the elementary school pilot, in alignment with the right to read beginning in 2024-2025 school year. This is a grade 9 program that will provide direct instruction, again, in literacy skills, because we're hearing from some principals that we have students who are entering into high school and they're not able to read, but there's not a strong solidified program for them. So this will require that they have direct instruction will occur in a learning strategies class in the first semester with literacy skills, reading and writing in semester 2. So we kind of have a gradual release. First we focus on reading and then into writing and reading in the second semester. The objectives of the program will be, again, to look at if we're having evidence-based reading interventions in secondary schools, will that improve students' ability to read in secondary and then open up access to them? And pathways, we're going to lose those skills to decode and focus on fluent and word reading and build overall capacity. And we'll support the use of technology and augmented technology for students who need it so that they have the tools that they need to be successful moving beyond. Next page, please. We'll also focus on this program on students developing self-advocacy and learning skills so we can build their self-esteem and confidence in academic settings and their emotional well-being throughout the program. And we're providing monitoring across all other subject areas that are not language-based. So similar to the elementary program, we'll be providing supports to make sure that if necessary modifications or accommodations to programming needs to happen, that it happens in a way that allows these students to be successful. Again, families and caregivers will be given the opportunity to attend a session about the science of reading so that we know the strength between home and school connection, provide feedback into the pilot, and hopefully we'll see a decrease in the number of students in high schools who are not reading. And finally, our last kind of project is a jurisdictional scan of blind low vision services. Our team's been looking at our current service model and criteria for blind low vision students. Thus far, we've reached out to the Provincial Demonstration School and the ministry to really seek some deeper clarity around what the support model should look like. And we've also connected with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. Once we've collected all the data, I'm going to the regional superintendent meeting coming up late February, and this is a part of the agenda to make sure that Peel's service to students who are blind low vision is at par or better than everywhere else. So we will be taking that back to our team and making any changes to current practices that are needed. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Superintendent Starr, for that full report. I see Les McDonald's.
How do you do?
Go ahead.
Again, West McConnell, hello everybody. I represent, I'm the alternate for OPEX. So I haven't been here for a little while, so it's timing in with that last item. I was just curious, because it was a briefer explanation for the other three projects. So I wanted to get an idea of what a jurisdiction scan, because that to me, scan seems like sort of like a review, but without looking quite as close. But maybe that's wrong. And I wanted, I mean, it's definitely, I'm just curious what is being reviewed, what exactly we're hoping to improve. I actually had a couple of questions that I was hoping that maybe we could answer. I don't know if you have the numbers now, but I wondered what your vision staff, the size of it is currently, how many vision itinerants we have on staff, and how many students we serve might have.
And through you, Chair, I'll answer your first question and then ask Coordinating Principal Jeff Bertrand to ask the second for you, Chair, if I may. So a jurisdictional scan means that when we're looking at our service offerings to students who are blind, low vision, we want to make sure that we have a deep understanding of what the ministry requirements are and that we've met them. We have already determined that we have, but we also want to, there's not a lot in the ministry guidance that talks about orientation and mobility specialists, for example, or how we use those in our board. So we wanted to make sure that when we were providing services and levels of service or services to students with degenerative kind of vision, that we were really making sure that we were thoughtful in our allocations and process to make sure that all students were being served. So part of that is looking at best practice of other boards and making sure that we make recommendations and accommodations to that. So that answers that part of the question, and I'm going to ask Coordinating Principal Jeff Bertrand to ask a numbers question.
Thanks. Through you, Chair, we have 9 vision itinerants currently at the moment, as well as a coordinator who oversees their work. In terms of numbers, I'd have to come back to you with an exact number of students on their caseload, but I could do that for next month.
Do we have an orientation mobility specialist on staff currently?
So we contract out that service. We don't have one in-house.
And is the contract, who has the contract currently? Is it currently being filled or?
It was just renewed. However, the person who is under contract is on a parental leave.
So what is happening in the meantime?
We are actively searching for a replacement. So we've connected with a number of potential orientation and mobility specialists, and then our coordinator is working with the provincial school to identify additional potential contracts.
Okay. Okay, and is there any, I guess I'll be blunt, are there any changes to staffing that will be happening for the coming school year?
So
Are there any drastic changes to
so
staffing?
through you, Chair, we are essentially in the process of looking at our staffing allocations, and no final decisions have been made. So we are looking at that right now as we speak, but there's no decisions that have been made.
Is that in terms of just matching it up with the natural ebb and flow of student enrollment, or is it steps in terms of changing the service model?
So both, we do staffing based on student population, and that's how we're funded through the ministry, of course. And then we would look at kind of the number of students seeking support and make decisions that way. And that's for all programs.
Okay, and that is what typically happens, but is there something else happening, or is that review that we're doing currently just for that?
We review that annually, and we do those reviews now because staffing processes happen now. I know it seems ironic, but we start the first round of staffing processes as early as February 1st. So we have to make decisions around staffing earlier than later.
Okay, so for the moment, there's no planned changes to the service model for the coming school year?
Not right now, no. But that's why we're taking the jurisdictional review. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That one question. Any further questions? Go ahead. Okay. So Jennifer.
Sure. So I'm gonna go back to communications class pilot.
Your mic is on.
Yeah, sorry.
Chair, I have my hand up. This is trustee Benjamin.
Okay, we're gonna get to you just one moment, okay?
Yeah, okay.
So I just want to understand the pilot part of this. You're calling it a pilot, but if I understand correctly, we're shutting down the contained classes and starting a new process. Is that correct?
So we're not using the term shutting down, folks, for you, Chair. We're not shutting down any classes, and in fact, there are no reductions of spots being offered to students. What we're doing is we're shifting the model. So they will still go to a different school unless it's their home school location. They will go into a regular mainstream classroom and be pulled for a third of the day to make sure that they're getting the Empower program and any requisite learning around literacy and instruction, and then have the ability to be integrated back into the program with additional supports from a resource teacher and modifications and accommodations to their program. So we are not shutting down any programs. We are transferring the model of the programs, and we're offering exactly the same number of spaces to students. So any student seeking a comm placement will still have a placement.
And same amount of teachers, same amount of staff will be used?
So no, because we're doing a communications pilot and we're doing an integrated model, which really we believe to be a better pathway for students because they have experiences in the mainstream classroom as they move on to secondary. There'll be what would a teacher normally would have one class of 8, and now they're going to serve in 3 points throughout the day, 8 students at a time.
Okay, so that they're going to move from school to school?
No, so that's why they're clusters. So we're moving, that's why they're still, there'll still be transportation granted and things like that. So students will come to them, get the reading support, go back to their homeroom teacher where they'll have accommodations, modifications, and the support of the resource teacher, and then get reading again the very next day.
We have data to support this change.
So we have done it again when we were making this decision of jurisdictional scan. Many boards have gone in this direction because again, and considering our ministry review and the impacts, the tremendous impacts of streaming, and understanding that limits pathways for students, there is a lot of data that supports it. We have some schools offering in-house the Empower Reading program, and we've seen great success in that as well. But not schools. All schools have the availability to do that, so we're supplementing using this.
But it'd be just interesting to see the data on the program as it was. Do we have that? So how successful it was as it is?
So we do have data around students accessing if they've improved in their literacy skills, but as I shared, unfortunately, we have some students, it's supposed to be a transition program where they go in for 2 years of intensive support and come back out. And unfortunately, they, kind of been in there for many, many years in a row. And so we would want to make sure that they're doing that. And when we consider also the right to read report, we've seen a tremendous change and shift in practice in our grade 1 and 2 and 3 classroom of excellent tier 1 and 2 intervention and literacy. So, we're hopeful that in the future that those students at a very early age get the reading intervention that they need.
All right. And we are seeking the input from the students and the parents now.
So we sent because it is pilot, so we haven't solidified anything. We're going to seek it throughout the pilot. I know that there has been some questions about it, but we've also heard a tremendous outpour of support for the program as well, because they want their kids to access the literacy, but have the ability to be in an integrated program and experience school and life the way as other students are doing it. You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Oh, sorry, trustee Benjamin, I think it's.
Yeah, just a moment. We're gonna.
Oh, okay.
We're just gonna go around to we're gonna get. Okay, Trent, you're.
Thanks. A couple of things on the communications. Again, I'm familiar with it in other boards, and children don't have to go to other schools. They just come out for an hour. They work with another teacher or a volunteer, and it's extremely successful.
Yes.
So even to call it a pilot, I mean, it's a well-established program that why don't we just do it? And then the other one is on the VOC 1, and this is more for future consideration, that whenever that person starts, they should really consult with external organizations like yourselves who are connected to employment to make sure that those competencies are the right ones being chosen.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, we could not agree more. We have a critical path for the person taking the role that includes making sure that we have connections, and we want to do a backwards design to the required skills that somebody would have when entering the workforce, and look at those skill developments as the progress, right? As not only functional literacy and numeracy has a progression, a curriculum expression, progression, so too do independent and adaptive skills have that progression. So we would be looking to SEAC, of course, and to community organizations. And I will share that we've had already our initial meeting with Project Search, and are considering that partnership as well. So I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to jump in here as the chair for tonight. I just want to comment on that. In terms of the bulk one, I heard you say like life skills and work and stuff like that. As this individual, whoever it is that takes over, they also need to consider that many of the students that have intellectual disabilities can go on to higher education. So what we have found with our group of students is they get channeled into life skills and nothing more. Many of our students are capable of more than just life skills, which a lot of life skills can be taught at home. I am definitely a proponent of the fact that school is for academics, right? I can teach my child to wash their face. I can teach my child to brush their teeth. That is not for school. They need to teach the kids academics so that at the end of their experience with the Peel District School Board, they are not a burden on society and their families. So that is something definitely that we need to put in there.
And through you, Chair, we could not agree more. We want the development of a curriculum, and not only the development of a curriculum, but implementation and monitoring, so that we are ensuring that students are progressing as they go through the 7 years of the program. So we would agree, we need a strong curriculum.
That's wonderful to hear. Just another question. Is it possible to speak with people that have already gone through the system? So I know what you say is to speak with families, to get surveys, but sometimes when you're in the midst of it, you don't know what the next steps are. So you can't really ask your questions. You don't know until you've actually gone through it and realized how good or bad it was. So if at all possible, if they can reach out to families that have already finished the program to find out where the deficits were and what could have been done better.
Yes, and through you, Chair, that's an excellent idea. And again, we will look at partnerships and pathways. We'll have to figure out how we talk to students, but I'm sure you can help us with that, and would have lots of value add to that. So thank you for that feedback.
And then going around this way,
so on the Walk One program, I think and going through both the programs that were displayed and the Walk One, since that the Walk One review is a bit more sort of generic in nature to improve the program. That's what it sounds like from the way it is worded. So I think to the point that was raised, I think, and also to Mary's point in terms of the life skills not to be so much of a focus in this program, but more of let's say employment and the future pathways, be it academic or employment. I think if the focus of this review and improvement is towards such specific objectives, and that could be sort of documented somewhere, might be a good idea to consider.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, the VOC one is actually the most comprehensive part of the projects we're working on. We're working alongside of the research department as well to make sure that we are collecting and collating data throughout the process and analyzing it. So we would agree that it is very comprehensive and that we need to look at, as we're talking about, where do we want students to be and how do we develop a program that develops their capacity across that. So thank you for that feedback.
any further questions? Yeah. Trustee Quinn?
Okay, I have to rethink some of my questions based on the comments and the answers. So what do we know about the effects on the students when they are moved back and forth between in regards to the elementary communications class pilot, when they are in a regular class and then moved out. Do we know how that affects the student's sense of stability? Because I know through what I remember of my early childhood and certainly my daughter's autism being having Asperger's, when there are shifts in environment, it can be disruptive, not for every student, but certainly for some. So what do we know about how we can limit that? Are we prepared to figure out ways to help students around that? And do we know how this is going to be affecting the general population? Is there going to be change in the dynamic of the teacher's interaction with them? Will they feel that they're not being given the same amount of attention? Those types of things. Just two questions, I guess.
Great, and thank you through you, Chair. Mental health and well-being needs to be a part of every class and every consideration. So there's not a classroom in our buildings that shouldn't be cognizant of making sure students are mentally well and feeling supported in their identities and intersectional identities. So as Kevin already shared, many school boards and many schools are already doing what we call withdrawal support. And what that means is that they're integrated into the mainstream program. They're withdrawn for the direct instruction or support that they need based on kind of their portrait, and then they're returned back to the classroom. So we have many students who and we're talking about communications class and making sure we understand that the portrait of a student in the communications class is one that has a learning disability, but has cognitive abilities or strengths and reasoning skills. They have, average to above average abilities in other areas. And they can thrive in a regular classroom environment. It's just that specifically the reading that they need support with. So we're giving them the support in the reading and allowing them to thrive and access learning in all other areas, or else we're limiting their pathways. So yes, transitions are always a consideration, and that doesn't matter for the communications class or any class. Some students have great facility with transitions, and some need additional support. And that additional resource teacher is there to make sure that they're making those considerations. And we're also in providing timetable support for schools who have the communications clusters and making sure that transitions are happening at breaks and not during the instructional day. So they come in from recess, they go right to their additional support. So we've really been strategic in our planning to make sure we've thought of those things. So thank you for the questions.
Okay, thank you.
And then we're gonna get to trustee Benjamin. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll preface by saying I have a couple of questions. I'll try not to eat too much time, and I'll try and ask these questions in a clear and kind of succinct way. So first, Superintendent Cicado, one of the questions I got, and I got this from a parent. Sorry, and I'll also say a couple of my colleagues who aren't members of the committee have sent me questions to ask. Trustee Carmoli, who's here with us in the room, has sent me a couple, so I'll try and be quick. But a couple of parents have reached out and they've asked me this question, and noticed you had said that this communication explaining this change was disseminated to parents and families within the PDSB. I received it in a report with the agenda on Thursday of last week, and a few parents have been a bit frustrated that they may have missed the communication, but they found it in a media source over the weekend. How was it disseminated to parents and families?
Thank you. It's through you. We disseminated through we wrote in our department a letter to families that included a link to the survey, and those were shared with all principals of current comm classes. And so they were asked to send through their regular format, this communication that was sent prior to the news report going out. So they would have received that prior. And it would have shared more accurate information than what was shared via the media. Like we have a deeper understanding of the portrait of the students who access the comm, as do the families. And that wasn't really highlighted effectively. So it was shared earlier. We also, in order to allow principals an ability to kind of really deeply understand, had a meeting for all existing communication teachers and principals and our special education resource teachers to make sure that, and we had about 30-page slide deck that kind of looked at kind of the rationale, how we were motivated to foster an inclusive learning environment, some of the reasons behind it, and we equipped principals with that ability. The first point of contact for families should always be school principals. That's the connection that really matters. And if principals are having trouble kind of navigating the conversations, we are there to support. And this amazing team that I have before me are all here because they're committed to these students and supporting schools and the implementation of all of these initiatives that we're talking about. So what's shared prior to that?
So just a follow-up on it. When did they have that meeting? Because I only received it on the Thursday. So would parents have been contacted on the
So
Friday?
it was a principal meeting.
Yeah.
And we will do a parent information meeting, but we wanted to make sure that the information was disseminated. And we will in future talk, meet with parents, and we're just working through with our coordinators at the back and coordinating Principal Bertrand on possible dates to make sure that and accessibility for all families. So we will be having that similar kind of meeting that we have with principals and communications teachers, but we know most questions would go to those people. So we made sure that they had that information prior.
And not to touch too much follow-up, but just for that one question. So when was that meeting?
Through you, Chair, I'm going to ask coordinating Principal Jeff Bertrand to answer that question. Anytime there's a number, I'm like,
Yeah, no problem. Just
Sure. Through you, Chair. The meeting with principals was last Monday, and then they were asked to send a letter to parents on the Tuesday.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much. So through your chair, a couple additional questions. So the program is described as a pilot. Is the administration able to share approximately how many students will be participating in this pilot and how many will remain in the current structure? I think in a response earlier, you mentioned that it's all students. And how long is the pilot going to run in this fashion before we have a conclusion?
through you, Chair, will be all students that will participate in the pilot, and we will be taking feedback and data throughout with hopefully an answer by sometime this year, this time next year, because as we shared, staffing processes happen now. So we'll do a comprehensive kind of data analysis to make sure that the supports in place are making sure that students learn and that we select feedback for next steps.
Wonderful, and just a few more in my list here. So in the current structure, students are receiving instruction in smaller class sizes, I understand, to be up to 8 students. And parents have expressed that this has given them a lot of opportunity for one-on-one learning. In the new structure, in the new pilot, I guess, for lack of a better word, will the structure provide the same small group of, one-to-one learning opportunities? How will that work?
So through you, Chair, I think I've already shared that it's still 8 children that are coming for the direct reading instruction. It's for 90 minutes. And in power lessons about 40 minutes. So there's 15 minutes of instruction that can happen. And we also have allocated additional resource teachers. So the answer is yes, there'll still be opportunities.
It sounds like there'll be opportunities, but they're being removed from what's going on in the classroom. So while they're being removed, how do we ensure that they're being supported for what they might be missing?
So through you, Chair, they're being removed for their literacy block and being replaced with a literacy block that's at the level that they need. So we made sure that principals understand that timetables need to match so that they're not missing any mathematics, science, art, phys ed, etc. That they are not missing any curriculum. They are getting the direct instruction in the small groups that they need for their language program, and then going back for the rest of the day, which they have capability and ability in.
Great, thank you for that. So as promised, just a couple more and we'll be through. So I looked through the overview in the report that was shared with us, and I didn't see it, but are you able to just elaborate a little bit more on what research or evidence justifies the shift from the current tier 3 model to the cluster-based approach? And how does it align with recognized literacy education best practices?
So we're aligning with the right to read in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 support. So as I shared earlier in our discussions, a lot of our schools are doing tremendous work in kindergarten, grade 1 and 2 to implement tier 1 and 2 supports, which is where we want the support to happen early and in their classroom. So they're looking at focused literacy interventions early on. And then the communications cluster would happen for students who tier 1 and tier 2 supports did not work, and they need a more intensive program. But we have to make sure that tier 1 and tier 2 are implemented, if that makes sense. So what we see from that, again, I think I've shared this a couple of times tonight, is that some kids are streamed into staying in communications class for a long period of time. We had to disrupt and dismantle that. We had to. We also are seeing that, the point of the class is this Empower program. And if they finish the Empower program, then they can go back to the regular classroom, right? So I guess the evidence is based on conversations with our special education resource teachers, some of our attendants, school-based principals all provide feedback. And we've had a number of very supportive calls from principals saying, I'm so glad that these kids will be back.
Thank you. And thank you. And just to end my list of questions, this is my last one. So again, with a lot of feedback that I received from parents and conversations with members of my community, one question that has come up often, to your point, there are a lot of people who are quite pleased with the announcement of this pilot, and there are some that have called with reasonable questions as well. Was funding one of the determining factors for this decision, or resources, or anything of that nature, or was it specifically to see the improvements outlined in the objectives?
So we always want to make sure that kids are served in the best way, inclusive way possible. That is the mandate and priority of our department. Is there a funding impact? Absolutely. I think there are funding impacts, but we would never recommend something that wasn't in the best interest of students in the purpose of funding, especially to our most vulnerable.
Yeah, so sorry, just to clarify, I'm wondering if perhaps lack of funding was a catalyst for this, or if it's just like an added benefit cost savings.
So looking at the members of my team, we've had this discussion over and over time. And I think we really, through feedback that we receive here and through the ministry review and the data that we talked about and the right to read, we believe this was the right time to make this move, because again, tier 1 and tier 2 interventions, you'd be amazed at the beautiful things happening in elementary schools around direct instruction of reading and through the support of both our team and the curriculum department.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Sacato. That answers all of my questions. And thank you very much for putting the report on the pilot together.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. And now to Trustee Benjamin. Sorry for the long wait.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me. I think my camera has been switched off from there, so I'm not on the camera. Anyway, some of the questions have already been asked by Trustee Alves, and I would like to congratulate the team for putting this together. It's a great initiative, and all the best, for its implementation. My only question that I have is, when you say that this is a pilot, is it going to be, how is it going to be implemented in a family of schools or in one particular school or throughout the board?
Thank you for your question. That's an excellent question. So what our team has done is made sure that we work alongside the planning department to make sure that the schools that are hosting clusters have the capacity and space to do so. And we also look at concerns around transportation, knowing that we don't want any child in a bus too long, making sure that we can, be considerate of those elements. And we're trying as much as possible, to Trustee Clark's excellent point, to reduce the number of transitions for students by putting the comm clusters into schools that already have existing comm classes, so that the transition for students won't be so significant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Trustee Benjamin. Before we go any further, I do have a comment. So with the comm class as well. So seeing as it says the students will be there for 2 years, that's, I guess, ideal, and then they will be going back to their home school. Okay, so that it's going to be imperative that we do monitoring and checking, I guess, teachers. So we don't want students in there for 2 years, not learning what they should be learning. And then, okay, your time's up, and they then go back, and they didn't really benefit from that. So it's gonna be definitely imperative that, you know, somebody is being the watchdog, if you will, to make sure that the students are getting the most out of their 2 years.
And through you, Chair, part of the pilot includes us hiring comm teachers, qualified comm teachers centrally. And so their coordinating principal, Jeff Bertrand, will be their principal and do regular check-ins. So we're taking some of that accountability, but we'll partner, of course, always with homeschool principals who need to ensure the integrity of the program. I agree with you that implementation, monitoring, and accountability needs to be part of all 4 of these things that we're looking at today.
Thank you very much. And do we have any further questions, comments? Yes.
Hi, sorry, I just wanted to follow up because I don't think I was clear enough because I don't think I know what I was saying. So, so now that I've thought when I going back to project 4, the jurisdictional scan of blind and low vision services, I just as I look at the other 3 projects, there's a much more fulsome description, perhaps in the objectives and so forth. And what we have for project 4 is just a bit of a blurb. And I'm sure there's more happening in the background, but it really doesn't. It just says we're going to do a scan, and once we've collected the data, we'll look at a criteria and service model and make and communicate changes. But are there any milestones in that, or like it feels like as I read that there'll just be a review. Okay, here's the changes, or is it going to be an interactive process? Is there some time frame around the scan, and will we expect updates throughout that process?
Yes, and through you, yes, we have already started a pretty significant scan. Both coordinating principal Jeff Bertrand and I have been trying to collaborate alongside of our coordinator with, as we shared, a provincial demonstration school. They have the same acronym as us, so I always get confused, and have meetings with the ministry already scheduled. As a part of our commitment, we do meet regular with other members of SEAC about this, and we'll commit to continue to do that.
Answer your question? Kind of look like
I wasn't quite sure in terms of timeframes. Like are these changes we're expecting to have in place this school year or going into next school year? Is this something we'll see an update in a month or 3 months, or are there any? There's just not a lot of meat to the
Yes, and so we have committed, so we already have a meeting with the ministry. And as I said, I'm going to the meeting February 22nd, 23rd with other kind of superintendents of special education in our in the area. So Toronto, York, Halton, etc. And this is on the agenda brought by me. We've had contact with the ministry thus far. Then we'll bring kind of that jurisdictional scan back and see if our service model meets expectations, and really look at kind of who our student population and enrollment are, with continued advocacy from your group as well as Jazzy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Don't think I see any further questions. So, yes, would you like to move to receive that?
Let's see if I can remember. I move to read.
And was someone to second Anne? And okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we will move on to 7.4, which is Ontario Student Information Systems reporting data.
Through you, Chair, I would like to ask our lead occupational therapist, Michelle Sillick, and our coordinator of social emotional learning, Faisal Haq, to present the report today.
Through you, Chair, we will be presenting 7.3, the guidelines for the alternative learning environment.
Oh, not so. Oh, my apologies. Sorry. I don't know what I was looking at. I checked it off before we actually, so yes. Getting ahead of myself.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent Scott. So through you, Chair, we will be discussing the alternative learning environment guidelines. This was originally brought to SEAC December 17th, 2019 by myself and another colleague, and we have decided to come back to seek consultation and support from all of you and to provide some revisions that we are currently working on. So if we go to the next slide, there are 4 types of ALE, alternative learning environments, that we use at the Peel District School Board. The first one is instructional or educational. The second is sensory. The third is gross motor. And the fourth is de-escalation, voluntary and involuntary. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight the changes to the current guidelines. So you have a copy in the appendix of the current guidelines and the previous guidelines. So the guidelines were revised to include a name change. The previous name was called a calming de-escalation ALE room. The new name that we're proposing is the voluntary de-escalation ALE room. The previous name is de-escalation ALE room, and the new proposed room is involuntary de-escalation ALE room. We also have included a subsection to provide additional information on how to repurpose these purpose-built safe spaces. The information in the guidelines has not been, or has been reformatted as per feedback from staff. And additional appendices have been included to clarify documentation requirements for staff. Next slide, please. So the repurposing de-escalation ALE rooms. So this is a new section of the guidelines. So if the student is no longer attending the school and or no longer is required to have a de-escalation ALE room as per the safety plan, the room can be either closed or repurposed as a gross motor or sensory ALE room. This room cannot be used as an ALE de-escalation room for another student without student-specific safety training. If a student arriving from a previous school had use of an ALE de-escalation room that was approved through student-specific training and on their current safety plan, the receiving school must update the safety plan and contact PSSP to support the creation of a de-escalation ALE room. Next slide, please. We've also created a chart to support schools as a quick reference. We will be discussing each space in more detail for tonight's meeting. So the first section that we'll be talking about is learning spaces, which is the next slide. And the next slide, the first one will be the educational or instructional ALE room. And this is any classroom that can be used for this purpose. It's providing instruction with direct supervision with staff and students. The documentation is in the IEP. It is based on the student's need, and the development is a school-based decision. So it's a decision based at the school level between staff and students. The next type is sensory. This is an alternative space which provides a soothing and or stimulating environment. Again, it requires direct supervision with staff. It is documented in the student's IEP. There must be involvement from an occupational therapist in the recommendation and training of equipment for staff and students. And the development includes the occupational therapist, the parent, the student voice, and school staff. It is a collaborative measure to incorporate these spaces. The third is the gross motor. It provides students with large movement activities and who would benefit from gross motor activities that's scheduled into their day. Again, it is documented in the student's IEP. The training must come from a physiotherapist and or occupational therapist. They recommend the equipment and also provide training to staff and students. And the development of these spaces includes the physiotherapist or occupational therapist, parent, student voice, and school staff. So there are 3 PDSB occupational therapists employed by the board who have been instrumental in creating universal spaces for gross motor and sensory at many of our schools in Peel. We are supporting schools on the creation of these spaces as proactive measures to meet the diverse learning needs of our students. At PDSB, we are committed to providing access to environmental accommodations to increase engagement and participation in meaningful education.
Through you, Chair, I'll be discussing the de-escalation rooms. The first room I'll be talking about is a voluntary de-escalation room. These rooms can be temporarily used to separate the children from the main room classroom to ensure safety for the student and the staff. These are board-approved rooms, and this can be staff or student directed, and there's no physical contact. The student can enter and exit the ALU room at any time. Documentation occurs in the IEP, the safety plan, and the positive behavior intervention plan, or the PBIM. School admin is to review the ALE guidelines to ensure consistency whenever using these rooms. If a school would like this type of room, this occurs through the accessibility project file. Next slide, please. The involuntary de-escalation room is used as a last resort after exhausting all other proactive and responsive interventions. After informed consent is obtained from the family or the guardians, students may be directed into the classroom. This may involve some physical intervention when there's imminent risk of physical injury to self or others. Staff will determine when the student can leave the room, and a student will not be placed in any other type of room. Documentation in this occurs in the IEP, the safety plan, as well as each time it's being used in the planned physical intervention ALE report. Training only can occur. This type of room can only be used after student-specific safety referral has occurred and a social emotional learning consultant comes in, observes, and makes that recommendation after informed consent is obtained from the family. If this type of room is required, it would be through the accessibility project file. Next slide, please. Additional guidelines. The Peel District School Board follows a least intrusive guideline. Both voluntary and involuntary de-escalation rooms are never to be used as punishment for a student to obtain compliance, to prevent damaging property, or means of removing a student indefinitely from a classroom. It should only be used as a last resort for a student after exhausting all other proactive and responsive interventions and when there's imminent risk to self or others. Next slide, please. A safety plan is developed for a student where behavior is known to pose an ongoing risk to themselves, other students, workers, or other people in general. A safety plan is a crisis response plan that outlines the roles and responsibilities of the workers that are dealing with the specific problem behaviors. Student-specific safety training is a board-level support which provides additional consultation to the school-based team, including school-based PSSP around individual safety concerns. Central social emotional learning consultants may provide whole training if deemed necessary due to safety concerns. The school team, which includes the administration, the classroom, the PSSP, consider this referral after a positive behavior intervention plan and a safety plan have been implemented for a period of time with the support from the school-based PSSP and other resource staff. A collaborative approach is always used, and this ensures that staff are aware and involved in the development and the review of the safety plans. Safety plans are reviewed at least annually, if not more. Families are consulted and provide input on the safety plan. Staff and families are informed and have access to the safety plan for their review and signature. Administrators must be involved when the ALE rooms are used for de-escalation. Administration and superintendent receive appropriate reports after ALE is used for de-escalation. Family and caregivers are encouraged to be involved during the development of the safety plan. Family caregiver signatures indicate that they're aware and have provided input and provisions contained in the safety plan. Family and caregivers are provided with a copy of the physical intervention ALE from every time it's used. Family caregivers are encouraged to collaborate with the school-based staff to provide feedback and suggestions for goals to incorporate student independence. We always aim to ensure staff and student safety in a collaborative and inclusive manner. Thank you, and we are happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that report. I see one hand over here. Sorry, can you tell me your name again?
Right.
Ray? Okay.
So the voluntary access and involuntary access, the ALE rooms, are there any physical differences in the features or, the facilities, the construction of these rooms? If some kid went in to a voluntary room and an involuntary room, will the kid know a difference that is an involuntary room or voluntary?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. There is no difference in the format of the room. It's board approved. There's no difference. It's just the way in which the students would access the room would be different.
So it could physically be the same space that's being accessed for different purposes depending on which student is accessing it and under what circumstance.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Trustee Clark.
Okay, just a little question. How many of our schools have both or either of these, the two types of the ALE rooms?
So through you, Chair, are you inquiring about the de-escalation involuntary and de-escalation voluntary?
Yes, yes.
So we are in the midst of gathering that data. We will provide that to you at our next SEAC meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm curious what one looks like. Like we get these reports, but we have never seen one. Either the sensory, the gross sensory rooms or the gross motor rooms or the voluntary ALE rooms. I would be curious what they look like, and if could you bring back some visuals for us?
Through you, Chair, I would love to take pictures and bring that to the next SEAC meeting. I think that's a great idea. Just to give a little bit of context, so the instructional can be a classroom. So it's just a regular classroom that's typically used for a student that may need an alternative space to do specific work with a staff member. The sensory rooms are typically repurposed conference rooms or seminar rooms, could be a classroom as well. That we're looking at what the student needs in terms of their sensory differences and incorporating SEAC claims to gather equipment that would support them. Gross motor rooms are typically classrooms that we have been able to, again, use SEAC claims to purchase equipment to support those students. We also are looking at universal design. So the 3 OTs that are employed by the Peel District School Board are creating universal spaces that can be a proactive measure for any student that might need to have an embedded break throughout their day. But I would love to take pictures and bring those to you next time.
Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing those at a future meeting. Kevin Wilson, you had your.
I've got a few questions, so I'll be brief. First one is the terminology. Why did you change to words like involuntary and voluntary? Because involuntary, is, the optics of it sort of don't really convey positivity. Like the other piece is it's a little confusing in some of the areas here, because you're saying it's when there's imminent risk, but then you're saying but don't use it for damage unless there's significant risks. So for me, that's a little confusing in terms of what constitutes when you use it and when you don't. The next one is you can't have a lock, but you can secure it. What's the difference? Because for me, it's the same thing. You're locking them in there, or you're holding them in there in some capacity. And the other one is more of a general question: is what de-escalation training do teachers receive so that they're not placing people in these areas of last resort, and when they don't have the skills to determine what that means, or de-escalate themselves before that becomes necessary. Sorry, that was a lot. I do apologize.
And through you, Chair, I'll take the first one. We wanted to be as transparent as possible and as accountable as possible. So we want families to know if students are entering into rooms voluntarily. And some students have a great sense and ability to understand, hey, I need a break right now. I'm going to walk in there and I need to have a quiet space. And so the change of language was a change of transparency to families. And the involuntary was as very last resort. We do this very rarely, but if there's imminent risk to self or others, then we have student staff who are trained to move a child safely into the room. And again, it's the same room. We just document for transparency and communication it differently. So it's a different documentation. It's the same physical room, but how they enter the room is documented because we want our staff to be accountable. And to your point, if students are involuntarily going there a number of times, I get the report, I call the school and say, what do we need to understand better? Do we need extra de-escalation training? Do we need trauma-informed practices? What do we need to do as a responsive measure? But when kids are going in there voluntarily, I think that's a great self-advocacy skill that I don't need to monitor and document. And we talk a lot about accountability and implementation. It was to build transparency of practice to families and accountability of practice, because if, again, students are going in there frequently, involuntarily, we need to do something more. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll let you two answer the other questions about, we do provide safety training and de-escalation training, but I'll let the team who does the training answer.
Thank you. So through your chair, there is CPI Blue Card training that all the staff are trained with. And then if we are looking to provide any additional holds or any method in which we are moving the student involuntarily into a room, social emotional consultant will go. They do an observation. They will observe the student and determine if that is the best response. If there's imminent risk, and we've gone through and really discussed any other proactive strategies, those are all done first. After informed consent is obtained, then there is some direct training that is involved, and then there's follow-up training that occurs just to make sure that everyone's consistently implementing. And then we are tracking to see how often we're going in there and what proactive strategies have we implemented to reduce and move towards more voluntary use of the room.
And through you, Chair, maybe Faiza, you can share the attendance at our meetings today around making sure that some of those proactive measures are done to the best of our ability so we avoid the involuntary. You can share a little bit about how many people were there today.
So we did significant training today, and we are going to be training continuing. So today I think we had about 40 staff that had attended the training. We do, so this is just one part of the thing. We're also looking at positive behavior intervention plans where we're teaching staff how to support the student in coming up with more proactive strategies to support a positive change so that we can make these changes and support the student in being able to access and getting their needs met through functional analysis and moving them towards how they can get their needs met in a different manner so that we're no longer having to use the involuntary de-escalation.
So just one quick, with in terms of those behavioral interventions, how much of the communication studies are involved in that too, because a lot of it's done in communication. I'm just curious in terms of the connection to the academic research on communications with behavior is big.
Yeah, we have a multidisciplinary approach to all students. And so we would have our speech and language pathologists go in there and do an assessment to make sure all behavior is a function of communication. They're trying to tell us something, and the ability to understand both their receptive, expressive language and or their communication skills allow us to have a comprehensive look. So we take a multidisciplinary approach instead of sending in just an OT or a social worker. We're trying to send in a team of people. So we look at the function of behavior, and then we provide, based on their assessments and clinical assessments, responsive supports that really do align to the function of behavior, because if we're not looking at that, then our supports won't work.
Trustee.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to follow up on my colleague Kevin's question. I didn't think I heard the response regarding the locking of the doors. So my colleague Kevin.
You asked
had
me
So my colleague Kevin had asked, the language used in the report mentioned securing the door, but we're not locking it. Do staff stand on the other side and hold it down? How does that work?
So we aren't locking the door, but we do stand by the door to maintain eyes on the student, and we are standing by the door to sort of maintain, to have them in the room. But as soon as the student is showing signs of calm, we're going in there and we want to encourage the student to come out as soon as there's signs of calm, right? So we follow the CPI model where we're looking to see immediate those signs that the student is starting to show signs of calm. We want to go in there and provide whatever they need in order to be able to exit the room.
Thank you. I would almost say in the spirit of transparency that maybe that language, at least in my opinion, and I think in Kevin's as well, didn't necessarily convey what's actually happening. You know, if the student is in there and actively has been involuntarily placed in there, one would imagine that said student who has been involuntarily placed in that room is going to try and exit that room, he or she, they, them, then that student would be being locked in that room. Like you're saying staff stand behind the door, locking them in the room temporarily. So I just had that point, and I did want to follow up. Just wondering, so Superintendent Sakata, you had mentioned that the room is often the same room. There's only one room that's used for two different purposes, and it's a matter of how it's being recorded. What happens in instances where the room is occupied by someone who's gone in there of their own accord, because they're, you know, monitoring themselves and they need to de-escalate, but there's another situation where someone who's been being involuntarily placed in, and you mentioned you weren't recording the usage when it came to voluntary usage, but I wonder in these unique situations where there's crossover, if we might capture that data.
And through you, Chair, usually they're specific to students who need them. So when we're building ALEs that are used for voluntary or involuntary, it's one student that requires it. We don't have many students, because if they needed it for comm, they would use one of the other school-built classrooms for that area, right? So this is specific usually to one student. And as we shared earlier, it's done through the PT and it has to be purpose-built, specific to specifications. So generally it's used for one student only. But if ever that were the situation, certainly the staff are responsible for the safety and well-being. So we wouldn't put a student involuntarily into a room with another student and create a lack of safety for that student, right? So I don't collect the data around the voluntary, because again, it's for that student only. Generally, that makes sense.
Got it. Okay, that does. Thank you. I think that's the end of my questions. Thanks so much. It's a great report.
Thank you very much. And we have a question from Trustee Benjamin online again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, you can hear me, isn't it? Yes.
Yes,
So
we can
there
hear
are four types of rooms for instruction, sensory, gross motor, voluntary. Now, during COVID, many of the schools in my ward, they made special rooms, you know, the calming rooms and calming spaces, because they felt students needed it. These rooms, some of them were so beautiful, so calm, you know, you wouldn't step out of it once you went in. So in addition to that, some of the principals also said that they had provided stationary bikes in the libraries and even in these rooms. So kids who were very hyper or felt restless or inattentive could be sent there to calm down, maybe take a book, read, and also, you know, spend some of the energy using these when you're sitting on the stationary bikes. Now, my question is, now these were all rooms spent, I mean, you know, the principal spent money and designed these rooms for the sake of our students. So when you talk of providing alternate learning environments, are you going to find out other spaces in addition to what is already there in some of the schools? And I know one of the schools has a wonderful Snowzealand room too. So will these rooms be additional, or I don't know how you're going to have all these areas set aside for our students?
So through you, Chair, we work collaboratively with our external agencies. So we have occupational therapists and physiotherapists who go to our schools regularly, and we work closely with them to see what the needs of our schools are. And so the OTs and PTs, along with the school teams, will advocate for these spaces, and we're working closely with planning and facilities to look at closed classrooms, looking at conference rooms, looking at repurposing some of the already classrooms that they have so that we can create these spaces. I think it's important to work as a team with the school team, with myself, with planning, with accessibility to ensure that we are providing these universal spaces for students. Because as you had mentioned, multiple students can benefit from these spaces. And so we're working very closely with principals and creating resources and videos and packages and checklists and consultation forms to help create these spaces. But it's working closely with those individuals that really know the profiles and portraits of our students to see what's needed at each school.
Okay, thank you. And one more question. So where is the funding going to come? Will the ministry be chipping in, or the board will have to find the resources?
So through you, Chair, it really depends. I think we are looking at school budgets to look at the universal pieces that can support all students. But when it comes to specific students and individual needs and sensory needs, we are looking at SEA claims. So we are using SEA claims-based funding to help create SEA claims for these students so that we can order and recommend specific equipment to support them to be able to access curriculum.
Thank you.
Thank you for that response. Shelley Foster, you will be very good.
So what I heard trustee Benjamin say is that there are already some rooms that exist in some schools. Those rooms are going to continue to exist. Am I correct? And we're not taking them away. So do we foresee a time when eventually when the majority of schools have these sensory rooms?
Through you, Chair. So yes, I think it's really dependent on the needs of our students and you know, the different programs and the students in mainstream and looking at what their needs are. And I think we are looking at more schools having these alternative spaces for any student who may need it as a proactive measure.
And through you, Chair, if I may, the only thing that might alter that is if there is a school that's at capacity, because we have to obviously use it for classroom instruction purposes first. So there are some schools in our board that do not have any empty classrooms or spaces that might not have access to these things.
But if they already have a sensory room, we're not going to go in and take it away.
So we would have to work with facilities to see if there's an ability to get portable on the space, or if there's a lot of requirements that we would need to look at with planning and facilities.
So there is a possibility if school enrollment goes up at a particular school and that particular sensory room is needed for instructional purposes, that sensory room would be taken away and used for.
Yes, there is a possibility, just to be transparent. Absolutely.
Okay, I do have, I'm a little confused. So we're talking about the involuntary room or whatever. I'm reading this and it says, this room should not be used to stop a child who is engaging in destructive behavior such as damaging property unless there is significant risk to safety and others, and should not be used to gain compliance from a student as a timeout or used as punishment for a student. So what other reason would be putting a student in there involuntarily? Like, can you give us an example of what a student could possibly do to be involuntarily placed in a room forcibly?
So through you, Chair, it would have to be a student who was inflicting self-harm or a student who was harming for trying to hit other students and staff. So sometimes, again, through stress behavior, through a communication, they often were having staff who are being hit, punched, kicked. So in order to ensure, because as a board, we're responsible for the safety of students first, but we're also tasked with the responsibility of the safety of the staff. So if they, or the other students. So that's why, you know, this team goes in and tries to help with the escalation strategies. We have like abilities to move back, protect the body. That's always a first choice. And if all of those other kind of tactics to try to de-escalate the child and calm them don't work, and there's continual potential significant harm to other students, then we would have to put them in there for their own safety and the safety of others.
So before putting a student in somewhere like this, are parents called?
Oh, yes. Yes, we have to have full consent to do any sort of hold on a student. Okay, absolutely. Parents are called, and often parents are requesting that their child goes into the de-escalation room involuntarily to make sure that they're not harmed or harming themselves, because even when they're hitting or harming others, they're hurting their own selves, unfortunately.
Okay, so I hear that, but I am.
Oh, sorry, through you. Go ahead.
Through you, Chair. Also, before this even occurs, there's informed consent. Yes. We talk to the parents prior to any use of the involuntary de-escalation room. There's a consent form that is reviewed. We talk about risks and benefits, and informed consent is obtained from the family prior to using this room. So we have consent from the families before this room is used. And then we also have it outlined with the families. If the student is in there, we ask them how long before we can call them. So if they've asked for a phone call every 10 minutes, we are calling them every 10 minutes to let them know the students have been in the room for 10 minutes. Do you want us, and then we're getting their feedback to ensure that it's a collaborative approach. It's not done in isolation. We're always ensuring the families are in constant communication with the family.
Okay, so then I need a little bit more clarification because I know okay, so we're just, obviously we're SEAC, Special Education Advisory Committee. So we're just talking about students with special education needs that are being put in these kinds of groups.
Oh, yeah.
We're not just talking about the general population.
No, yes, that's definitely students who would be supported by, yes, for our department.
Okay, because I'm
Yes.
sure there's our students being put in rooms, maybe not these rooms, but other rooms. Okay, that just kind of threw me off.
No,
like those students are being put in rooms and held
And
and parents are
often
not
students with exceptionalities who would sometimes a common use for the de-escalation of involuntary is headbanging, for example, or those.
Okay, gotcha.
Those types of behavior, not for our mainstream.
Thank
students,
you
no.
for.
Okay, thank you.
Because I was just so confused. I'm like, I know there are parents that did not get consent to the, yeah. Okay, that, yeah. I forgot where I was for a moment. Okay, thank you. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so do we have any further questions, comments, queries? Okay. Well, thank you so much for that report.
I'll move for proceed.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to say that was really good report and yeah, that is actually very helpful. Because I think once I was listening to you and even myself reading it, I was forgetting special education and I was just, yeah. Yeah, too much was happening in my mind. But yes, this is absolutely wonderful. And Shelley Foster, we'd like to move to receipt. I'm just gonna see if anybody else? Jennifer Knight. Thank you. Guys, yeah, so Jennifer Knight's been on second. Thank you very much for that. That is awesome. Okay. So now we'll move to 7.4, which I jumped to earlier. Ontario Student Information System.
Through you, Chair, this is based on a request from our last SEAC meetings that we bring back the report, the ONSIS report, and I'd like to ask coordinating principal Jeff Bertrand to present this report.
Okay, good evening. So this is the Ontario School Information System, or ONSIS, reporting data for special education. If we can go to the next slide, please. So just some context, we provide this to the Ministry of Education at the end of October. It basically outlines the number of students identified with each exceptionality and their corresponding placement within the 5 categories in the Education Act. It's sent on, it's collected October 31st and sent shortly thereafter, and then we verify it at the end of March again. Next slide, please. So some additional context and impact before we start going into the numbers a little bit. We are required to provide special education services and programs for students who've been identified through an IPRC. However, we also recognize that we need to offer services to students in some cases where they have not gone through an IPRC. And so when we go through the numbers, you will see that there are identified and non-identified students receiving special education support. Next slide, please. Again, for some of our exceptionalities, this is a significant difference because not all students go to IPRC in order to receive a placement, particularly, and often if we're talking about itinerant support. So for students who may be identified as deaf, hard of hearing, blind, low vision, having autism and or a physical disability, they may not go to IPRC in order to receive special education supports. And so the numbers, when we show them, will not necessarily include all of the students that are being supported. And with that specific exceptionality, they will be lumped into the non-identified students at the bottom of the table. Next slide, please. So this is some historical data on placements by identification. And so you will see at the bottom that there are students identified by IPRC and students not identified by IPRC that are receiving special education support. Just as a note, where it says NR, The numbers are too small to be reported due to privacy concerns, and so we just put NR there. And then the ones where there's actually 0 are listed as zeros. And if we can go on to the next one, please. So again, here, this is placements by exceptionality. So this is whether students are placed into a regular class or a special education class, because those are the two broad categories under the Education Act in which a student can be placed. And then within those two, there are 5 distinct placements. Of note here, if you look at something like multiple, second from the bottom, you'll see that it's 72. That's the congregate number. It's not broken up into special education class and regular class, again, due to the low numbers and the need to ensure student privacy. So that's why you'll see a few of them only have 1 bar. It's because they would have had a non-report as either on the previous graph, or when we break it into placement types, one of the numbers is so small that we cannot report it. And so we use a congregate number. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear to everybody. If we go on to the next one, these are students receiving special education support. Blue line is students who have gone through an IPRC and are identified as exceptional. Orange is those who are receiving support without having gone through an IPRC. Same time frame, again, and this is for the sum total for the board. The next slide, please. This is broken into elementary students. Again, blue is exceptional, having gone through an IPRC. Orange is not. Same time frame. This is specific to the elementary panel. If we go to the next slide, that is the same information specific to the secondary panel. And the same colors. So again, identified as exceptional with blue, and orange would have been students who had not gone through an IPRC. And if we just go to the last slide, so this again, as I said, gets verified in March 2024 and resubmitted to the ministry along with at the end of the year. We do another report, but these are the 2 key reports that the ministry collects on our student data. That's the end of the report. Happy to take any questions.
Do you have any questions?
So. Just the one, and through you, Chair. So forgive my unfamiliarity. Declining number of students identified as exceptional versus not, or vice versa. Can you elaborate on why that might be in either scenario?
Sure, through you, Chair. There's a variety of reasons that could be occurring. It could be the availability of assessments. So in some cases, psychoeducational assessments. Could be a change in our internal practices around pursuing a formal IPRC placement as opposed to a non-identified placement in order for students to access service quicker. It could be the phasing out of contained classes and therefore students not requiring a formal identification to access that service and still receiving other non-identified support. So there's a variety of reasons why the numbers may decline or increase over the 10 years reported on.
Thank you very much. That's my question. Thank you.
Can we get the placement broken down further by elementary and secondary and primary, junior and intermediate? That's how we used to get it.
Probably. To be honest with you, we asked for the J reports that are provided directly to the ministry, and this is the information, but I can certainly go back and try to get it by division if you'd like.
Yes.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Kevin, you have a question?
This is great. Thank you. I was going to ask the same question as my colleague that looks over there about the huge difference in the non-identified. So in terms of how is that the IPRC process communicated to parents across the board? Because there's a lot of people in the board who are new to the country and don't really know how it works here. So how are they going to know what an IPRC is and how that works? It's hard enough for people that have been around to navigate that process, never mind people who are new.
So through you, Chair, there's a variety of ways in which we can communicate that information. So our special education plan is posted on our public facing website. which does have information about the IPRC process. We do have a guide, a parent's guide to IPRC. And then through our SRM process, the student review meetings that are occurring at schools in which parents are invited to participate in those, especially at the elementary or in the elementary panel where our special education resource teachers participate in those meetings quite often. They would be able to speak directly to the IPRC process, both at the school and or if it's a central IPRC for some of our others. And then in secondary, again, we do have CERT supporting schools, but we also have our secondary department heads who would be able to speak to the IPRC process for parents.
And through you, Chair, if I can just add, also through our We Welcome the World centers, they are very well equipped as they welcome new Canadians to our ward at identifying students with special education needs. And they have identity specific and people who help them through that process right from the onset. So they're equipped with that. And we also have settlement workers in schools who often speak the same languages as our families and help them again navigate that process.
And one more quick follow-up, which was in the categories, I see this, in terms of the deaf and hard of hearing category, there's children in the general education classroom. I just want to know, are all those teachers of those kids certified in ASL?
In
American Sign Language?
Sorry, are you saying in the contained programs or in the mainstream programs?
No, in the mainstream. So there's 35 kids in a regular class who are deaf and hard of hearing. Are all of the teachers of those children, do they know ASL?
Can I just tell you that this board, the children that were deaf or hard of hearing are all verbal. So they don't use ASL in the classroom setting. If a child needs ASL supports, they would be transported to EC Drury.
Demonstration.
Okay, thanks.
So we have Jennifer next. And we also have a question online from Trustee Benjamin. I'll go direct to Jennifer.
I'm just looking at the physical exceptionality and noticing that almost half of students with just a physical disability are in a contained class or in a special education class. I'm just curious as to why that would be, or if this data is not correct. Physical is supposed to be strictly physical. If they have other challenges, they would be multiple, right? Multiple.
Through you, Chair, perhaps I'll go back and collect that information as to what classes they're in. I can speculate off the top of my head, but that's not necessarily my portfolio. So I'd prefer to gather that and come back to answer that question.
Do you think that's a real number that half of the students with physical disabilities are not in mainstream?
That's what we reported.
That's something I need to know a lot more about.
And we can do that.
Okay, thank you. We'll look forward to that information at a later meeting. So Trustee Benjamin, you have a question online?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. My question is, on page 4, students not identified by an IPRC are 13,198. So do these students have an IEP? Number one. And the other question is, can you give me some specific examples of students who are not identified by an IPRC?
Through you, Chair. Yes, so the vast majority of those students would have an IEP, but they are receiving a variety of special education supports. And then an example would be in our board for students who are blind, low vision. They do not necessarily go to IPRC in order to receive itinerant support. So that would be one example.
Okay, thank you.
And we have a question.
Oh, what is the threshold for NR? Is it 10 or less than 10? Or what is?
It's 10 or less.
10 or less, okay. And I was just a bit surprised by the numbers with blind and low vision, but I've been absent from here for a while. But over time, I'm surprised like this sort of consistent 16 or 18 and so forth. And I'm just wondering if some I'm just saying sort of historically, when my son was at board, he would have a primary he would be the primary student of a vision itinerary, for example, and they would have a caseload of quite a number of others. And when I do the math here of 10 or less kids, and we have 9 vision itineraries, presumably they have no caseload other than the one child they're serving. So the numbers seem a bit off to me because.
So through you, Chair, again, because our common practice is not to identify students who are blind, low vision through an IPRC. They're not represented in the number that is on that line. They would be represented at the bottom in students not identified by an IPRC. So our itinerants do have large caseloads, but the students are not necessarily formally identified, and that's why that number has sort of stayed the same and is misleading, and that's why we wanted to provide that context at the beginning.
Is there a reason they're not identified? Just because I mean, some obviously, or my son is fully blind, and he did have an IPRC and had an IEP, and some kids would be lower vision, some there'd be quite a range, and I'm just wondering why they wouldn't necessarily have an IEP. One, because certainly helps your funding to have the appropriate number of children or students recognized.
So through you, Chair, they would have an IEP. They just may not go through a formal identification process, as it's not required in order for us to provide itinerant support, which is the most common placement for our blind, low vision students.
So just to clarify, they're able to access all levels of support without the IPRC.
I see. Okay. And I assume you know this, but I mean, in the cases of the population of blind and low vision children, quite often there's another exceptionality. So presumably some students will be served by vision itineraries that are under this multi exceptionality. Do we have numbers on that separately that we would report? Like, for example, I just figured that if you had a dozen children that were blind and low vision and also were ASD, do those numbers show up somewhere?
So that's a really good, sorry, through you, Chair, that's a really good question. It's something I perhaps could have added to the context slide at the beginning. All of the data in here is reported by a student's primary exceptionality. So if a student has 2 exceptionalities, they're only reported for their primary for the purposes of the ministry, so that they're not counted twice. So in order to get the information that you're asking about, how many students may have multiple, it wouldn't be through this report. I'd have to go back to LTSS and ask how we could pull that report, because the ministry requires us to do it by primary exceptionality.
So I have a comment then that since so many of our kids are not being formally identified, why does the ministry still insist on getting this information? Because how can they plan? How can they make any kinds of plans when there's this large number of kids with no identification? How do they know that boards have the right number of itinerant teachers of the deaf, itinerant teachers of the blind? How do they know they have enough supports? How do they know when the numbers are so vague, and why do they continue to ask for this number?
Through you, Chair, that's also why we report on the non-identified students receiving special education support, because it does give a more accurate picture of the total number of students that our department would support throughout the entire school board.
Yep, it's a total number, but it doesn't say what supports that they get. What supports are they accessing?
Well, we have that information internally so that when we are going through our current staffing process, we know roughly how many itinerants we would need to support our blind, low vision students with a reasonable caseload to ensure they get supports. That would be our sort of internal decision making.
But the ministry doesn't know. So my mind reels why the ministry still requires this report.
Through you, Chair, I can ask the ministry in my meeting that I'm going to on the 22nd, and determine if there's a better mechanism for collecting the data.
I think
Absolutely.
I think there needs
will-
to be
I will
some
raise-
better mechanism. because
Absolutely.
of-
I will raise that question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer, next?
This report that you used to determine the needs, is that something we can see? You've been asking for that for a while, so are they students by the supports received? The number of students who are receiving each of the supports and students has needs to make sure that discuss, what supports you need, not just what you need. Is that something you can share with the SEAC? Because it would really help us when we're trying to advise to know what, we've got this whole bucket, 60% of our kids don't have any idea what supports. Even this bucket, we don't know what supports. Just because they have an exceptionality doesn't mean they're all getting the same supports. So that would be a very
And through you,
helpful
Chair, I will consult and take that question back and consult with Catherine Lockyer around what ability we have to share that level of reporting and get back to you with the answer and some rationale as to why we share or not share.
I have a final question, so I guess not final, but I have a question as well. So do the identified students and the non-identified students generate the same amount of funding? Or is it just the identified students that generate the funding?
So that's a great question, and a question that Associate Director De Silva and I have already discussed, and we will get back to you on that. I don't know offhand what the per pupil allocate, the spec ed funding for identified versus non-identified is, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I just want to make sure that we're providing the accurate information. I know there is funding. And it's been a long time since I was that deep into the finances. So I'd have to get back to you and go through my associate director to find out exactly if they are equivalent or not. And if not, then I think we have some work to do.
That would be a problem for our identified students, because then their funding would be going to. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. So on that note, can we have that response come back in I think it's the log that we call it on the agenda where we have the questions and answers. So if the funding question specifically can come back in the log, and also the clarification that my colleague Sherry Foster asked regarding mechanisms, because they kind of go hand in hand, right? Like if the mechanism is needed to further identify the non-identified students receiving support, and if there is a funding discrepancy, I feel like those two would go hand in hand. And the only question I had was regarding the IPRC information that's disseminated to parents. Is that available in a multitude of languages? I think the answer is likely yes, but I just wanted to get that confirmed.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This is a really fulsome report. Thank you very much for putting it together and presenting it.
I just wanted to get something about the IPRC guide. It's supposed to be at schools, and as far as I know, there's none available at any school. It's only available online. And the last time I saw one, the information in it, as far as this committee is concerned, is extremely outdated. And I think somewhere in your office, you have 20,000 IPRC guides that cost like $20 each. And every superintendent has said, well, they're so expensive, we can't just give a bunch to the school. So they're outdated, never shared, and very expensive, no good anymore. And through you, Chair, we do have a writing team who's working on an update to align with our student review meetings and that process. So that is something, again, we are working on. So we are working on that update. So if it's reprinted, I hope it's reprinted. Can it please be reprinted on less expensive paper, less expensive cover, so that it can be shared at schools without somebody thinking these are too expensive to share? Thank you. Here's just their intention to be shared.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? I think we discussed that pretty well. Yeah. Okay, so 7.4, can we move for receipt of that? Anyone, trustee Lucas, and second? All right. West? Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so then we're gonna move on to number 8. So communications for action or receipt. That's where we are.
Yeah, we are great. That's what we have. Yes.
Why did I think we were ahead of that?
No. That's not what I did.
I apologize, Chair.
Okay. So any communications for action or receipt? No? Okay. Number 9. Chair's request for written questions from committee members. Question, but, well, Shelley University.
No, they have them.
Okay.
Thank you.
So number 10, reports from representatives on the councils and association. Anything? Okay, move it along. So question asked of and by committee members, that's number 11. So, Jennifer next.
So I think you alluded to this a little earlier in your report, but there's a lot of rumors floating around about staff cuts, layoffs, whatever you want to call them, and cuts to the budget, significant cuts to the budget. So I'm just curious as to when we'll have some information about what the plan is, how much the spec ed department is going to lose, how we're going to manage it, because everyone sitting around the table here knows that we're already challenged a lot. We hear it every week, every month when we're here. So we'd really like to understand what that's going to look like and how we can have input into it and when we'll have input.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. We are in the process, as shared earlier, as looking at a department structure organization that meets the needs of our students, and taking in the number of students who we have in each of the exceptionalities and making sure that we're aligning our supports to represent those numbers that Coordinating Principal Bertrand talked about. So we are in the process of having those discussions as a collaborative team. It's not something that I do simply on my own. It's very much something that everybody who's here and many people in their departments, and we take the feedback from those in the field as well to make sure that we're making decisions for a department organization that meets the needs of students and families. So when we have an approved an approved structure, we certainly can share that back with you when we have that structure approved. It is something we're in the process of doing right now.
There's a rumor going around that everyone in the central board, so all of our ignorance, having affecting autism, physical, developmental disabilities, blind, vision, deaf, hard of hearing, multiple, have been told they don't have jobs. Is that accurate?
And through you, Chair, I'll ask Associate Director Paul DeSilva to take that.
Yeah, thanks. Through you, Chair. Yeah, so there are no rumors. All central staff have received according to their collective agreements. As every single department, not special education, it's innovation research, curriculum, all central departments, all staff received a letter to ensure that when we abide by that due date, which is tomorrow, January 31st, is a big outline in the collective agreement that folks need to know whether or not their term has ended or not. And so all central departments have been asked to make a proposal to come forward to the director's office to see what that structure is going to look like. Connie and I are in the midst of gathering all that information. She's done a great job listening to her staff. And so we need to get that information in alignment with our current staffing processes, and it's tight. And so currently right now, we wanted to ensure that we didn't make a mistake or a mishap anywhere in the system. So all staff was provided the same letter to ensure consistency across the systems. And then as early as tomorrow and Friday and next week, we're sitting down to really look at the department structures, making sure that delivery models are appropriate for all staff that we abide by legal responsibilities for all of our folks, all of our students in the school. But structures are definitely going to change. We're a public institution, and we need to look at how we can do things with the same amount of finances, either better or restructure so that the service model is such that we can continue to do the great work that we do. And so I would say that the funding comes in many forms, right? School success funding, priorities funding, as well as GSN funding. So these things come at us at different times of the year. So it's very difficult to determine staffing currently right now until the minister provides the funding so that we know exactly what we have in the pot in order to provide that organizational structure. So the team, that's responsible for social emotional learning, special education, will come forward with the best plan appropriate to ensure that that model is going to get you what you need. But to say that we're going to have all the same staff back, I can't guarantee you that. Can't guarantee that.
So it's different this year than previous years. Is why do you normally do this every year at this time?
We do. No, we don't, and I don't want to speak out of turn. I think some of these questions are probably most appropriate for CEO Jasper Gill around where we stand financially as a board, but we are responsible to our communities and people that write the check, and so we need to ensure that we're doing everything we possibly can. That the ministry is asking us, the community is asking us, and ensure that delivery is most appropriate. And really, at this point, there are difficult times. They're difficult times to deliver difficult messages to individuals who I know in this room, in this department, that truly care about kids. And I think what you heard today in the presentations from Superintendent Staccato is that she's listening to the voices in this room, and she's willing to operate at a level that is best for kids. And so this is the dilemma that we, if I had my druthers, and I would have this infinite pot of money that I could provide and share with every single one of you, but that is not in fact the case, and we're being held accountable to the finances that we have, and to our community and to the public. So we're going to do the best that we can. And we know that it's not just about someone's paycheck; it's about someone's child. And so that's what we're doing, and we're making some tough decisions, and hopefully we come out on top.
So do we have a timeline for?
Yeah, so I'm trying to manage the timeline, because I asked when is the next SEAC meeting. I don't know if there's that kind of time in terms of providing that kind of structure back here with SEAC. As it stands right now, we're looking to make decisions within the next couple of weeks around structures and organizations, to be quite transparent.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so February 27th is the next SEAC meeting, and that's beyond, I think, for those of you in the room, our G memos, which is our staffing structure memos that tell us when individuals need to apply for positions and so on. So in that January 31st timeline was important, because in the event that staff wanted to apply out, knowing that potentially that there is a position not waiting for them here, then they need to have the opportunity to have a track that posting.
So are we worried about losing some of our expertise?
Sorry?
Are we worried about losing a lot of our expertise?
I'm always worried about losing my expertise, whether it be a special education staff person, principal, teacher. Always worried about that.
Trustee Lucas, question, and then.
Thank you, Chair. A question in response to Director Paul De Silva's response there. So, sorry, I was confused. You were saying tough times. We might see cuts. We might see staff not being retained. Is this in any relation to the fund? Is there a gap in funding? Did the Ministry of Education make a cut that's trickling down? Did we not get the request for additional funding during the budgetary consultation process, where trustees had the opportunity to review specific case studies, where I think we I don't want to, there's some confidentiality there. I can't speak to the, how many we approved, but just, I'm wondering some of the language you used. I'm just a little confused by it.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I'm not sure they're related to any of those business cases. The business cases are unrelated to the organizational pieces that stand right now. We haven't heard the business cases actually for this year for 24-25 school year. So currently we're looking at organizations and staffing for next September.
So sorry, through you, Chair. So in your response to Ms. Knight, are you saying that, you were saying you use the words where it's a tough times? That's I don't think that's a direct quote, but something about big tough times. And I'm just trying to understand the rationale. Are we worried that we're not going to have the funding from the ministry in 24-25? I'm just trying to circle the square here. It sounded like we were alluding to the potential to be losing some folks. I'm just wondering if that would be because we don't need them anymore, or maybe we do need them, but we're not getting the funding from the ministry. I'm just trying to have a clear, transparent answer there.
Yeah, and I don't want to, like, through you again, Chair, I don't want to step out of line because I'm not the financial guy. I'm not Mr. Bertrand, the numbers guy. But one could estimate where we are based on potentially information that the public has currently, that we're driven by the number of students that come into our system, and we're losing students, plain and simple. And when you're losing students, you're losing money.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
What's the
I just had, I guess, sort of follow up to something Jennifer had asked that I'm not sure if was answered, but I also, having been around here a while and then not having been, I don't recall this process happening before, but so it gives a feeling like the sky is falling, but maybe this is a routine process that happens every 3 years or so. And I'm speaking specifically to the termination letters, like that going out as a blanket measure. Is that a new methodology, or is that something that happens at intervals? And when is the last one?
Through you, Chair, I'd like to strike the termination letter statement. It's not a termination letter. Yeah, it's an end of a term letter. At one time, many years ago, I was the staffing officer here in Human Resources, and this is a common practice. So every year, specifically for positions that were created through PPF funding or SSF funding, staff would be receiving.
But not so much like that might be on an individual project, but this seems like this seems to be more of a blanket.
Yeah, so not on an individual scale. So anyone, it was required of us to provide that. I will preface though, however, this is the first time, yes, that all staff essentially have received a similar letter. And that's to ensure that we don't limit their opportunity in the event through this race to kind of restructure and reinvent departments, that they don't lose out on a potential opportunity to seek another position at a school or somewhere else.
Thank you. Just a couple questions that I asked last month that I didn't get an answer to. How many grade 8 students took advantage of Reach Ahead, and how many secondary students took advantage of Blogger? Another question.
Through you, Chair, I did not have those documented in the motion log. I had other questions that were asked documented and responded to. So if we can make sure they're documented, I will make sure I bring back a response.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies.
And earlier in the meeting, we spoke about the communication going out from the principal to the parents about the review of all these programs, the communications programs. SEAC had asked in the past, if these kind of communications are going out to the parents, could we also be included? Because they concern us and parents that we advocate for and kids that we advocate for. So we would like to also receive these communications.
So through you, Chair, we can discuss how that we would operationalize that, because, you know, we the primary person for communication is the home-based school, because again, that's where the relationships are happening. So we're a central department, but we can talk about if we're sending out communications to families, if we can send it also to the SEAC-DL. I will consult with General Counsel Catherine Lockyer and get back to you with that.
Okay, thank you.
I see another question from Kevin Wilson.
Sorry, I'll show it after this. If we go back to the sort of the budget piece, if obviously, you know, we have a human rights legal obligation to support our kids. So, you know, it seems to be, you know, whenever there's any tough times, it's like the special programs and the IT gets cut first, right? And then, you know, we're impacting children's lives, and these are the kids that need it the most. That's one thing. You know, there's different ways we can do things without, you know, where we can still reduce money, but not the support. I'm curious, is any of this impacted by the government's loss in the public sector pay? Are we having to pick up the cost of the collective bargainings that had to be repaid?
Through you, Chair, to answer the first question, we are very keenly aware and advocating for our legislative requirements and legal responsibilities and supporting students with disabilities and exceptionalities. That has been made abundantly clear in our process of making sure. So I please feel confident in that. And as for your second question, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, and I do want to, sorry, through you, Chair, if I may, you know, there was an approval for what was the total number of EAs that were just approved? I mean, there was, I think.
So since we began, the director's office has approved an additional, I want to look to coordinate, this was 170, I think. Yeah, 170 EAs from since the start of the year, since September. So there has been significant support from the director's office to students with special education needs. And so I just want to share that we understand our commitment and uphold that.
I think we could resign to ministry of that, you know.
Through you, Chair, we do have ongoing meetings, and we just recently had a meeting with the ministry where we looked at our numbers. We took them to some of our schools and showed them the amazing supports that our board offers to students. Applewood was one of our visits. So we are advocating and have offered some problem-solving solutions to the ministry around both funding and support.
Another question, Jennifer?
Yeah, my last one. You mentioned that the budget submissions had already been submitted. Is that what I heard? For the plans for yeah, okay, misunderstood that. I thought you said they came across your desk, so I was just curious as to when we were going to see them, if that was the case. Thanks.
I just had a question, kind of follow up with the previous question regarding the EAs that you said were hired. Is it possible, like, I'm just curious as to what the qualifications of an individual to be an EA. It's out in the field there, when you see the EAs, many of them are not qualified to support our students with intellectual disabilities. So I'm curious, like, is it possible to see what the application and what the qualifications are for these people?
And through you, Chair, that is really through our Human Resources Department that does all of our postings and hirings. But I'd like to ask Coordinating Principal Erla Jacket to share kind of a summary of what some of the qualifications are, acknowledging that we do have some in the system supporting students that need to be continued support. And through Coordinating Principal Jeff Bertram's department, we offer ongoing EA modules, both online and virtually, and have offered just some as recently as a few weeks ago to EAs to make sure there are some compulsory modules that they must take, and there are some optional ones that we think are best practice. So we do offer as a board significant supports in their training, but I'll let Coordinating Principal Erla Jacket respond.
Through you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I'm madly scrolling through some information from our HR department to read some of the acceptable degrees and diplomas.
to apply for and be accepted in an EA position. And I think I opened the wrong document. So I will check another one. I can say that colleges such as Sheridan and Humber and Mohawk offer educational support service worker programs. So they do have specific programs. Okay. So this is the list of post-secondary education that would be considered directly related experience. So advanced studies in special needs in addition to early childhood education, autism and behavioral science, Bachelor of Applied Science with a major in child and youth and family, behavioral sciences technology, child and youth workers, child and youth care practitioners, child and youth worker degrees, child care workers, community service workers, corrections workers diplomas, community and justice studies, designated early childhood educators and registered with the Ontario College of Early Childhood Educators, developmental disabilities workers, developmental service workers, early childhood education degrees, educational assistant support worker diplomas, exceptionalities in human learning, interveners for deaf-blind persons, psychology degrees, nursing degrees, registered practical nurses, social service, social work degrees, and sociology degrees. Those are some examples of some of the acceptable credentials to apply for educational assistance in our dorm.
So then my question would be, do you pair the appropriate education with the appropriate student? Because not everybody's qualified to work with a child with intellectual disabilities just because you took an ECE class, right? So do they pair that up, or do they just, whoever applies, gets the job?
So there isn't necessarily a direct pairing between the base or the foundational degree or diploma that somebody has, but we have modules of training. So there are 6 modules that are developed collaboratively between the Special Education Social Emotional Learning Department, and EA Union has helps to support development of the modules so that it is applicable to what they're experiencing in the field. And these modules include the CPI that was mentioned earlier, the verbal de-escalation training. There are modules in back care and lifting, modules in supporting behavioral and supportive practices for supporting the behavioral needs of students. Trying to think of the names of them specifically. There's a set of 6 that are revised and updated regularly.
So when we're talking EA, do they only, so what you're describing to me seems more like assistance to get from point A to point B, or like behavioral stuff. Do they assist the child in actually obtaining their academics in any way?
So the role of an EA in our board is to support with personal care and safety. The educator, the teacher, the student, that's the special educator in the spec ed class or in the mainstream class, is responsible for development of the student program through the individual education plan.
Right, but that person doesn't assist in any way. Like if they're sitting beside the child and the child is having a little bit of trouble maybe making a sentence, that person is not qualified to help them write a sentence, or they're just there to help them go to the washroom.
So they do support in those things go hand in hand, right? If the student is having difficulty with, regulating and attending to the task at hand, they're doing the supportive actions and what we call fading support, like providing support and fading support to support the student to follow through on the tasks that have been developed by the educators.
Okay, because I don't know if it's just students with intellectual disabilities, but many of the individuals that are supporting our students, don't get me wrong, don't have a grasp on the English language, whether verbally or written, right? So I don't see how that supports the students. Like those types of things, I think also need to be checked when we're us, I don't know if you're saying assigning someone to a student. If the student has their intellectual disabilities, they have challenges with the English language. They have maybe OT issues with forming letters, and you have someone, this is more of a personal experience, so I know what I'm saying, an individual that doesn't write the actual English letters, how we write them, and they're supporting a student, you know what I'm saying? And they don't, the guy, you know, you have children with articulation issues and hearing issues, and an individual doesn't speak, trying to be careful here, with the proper.
As an accent.
Well, yeah, but yeah, like students, I had one, I'm just gonna give you a personal experience. I had a TA tell me that my child does not respond when she speaks. I said, well, what do you say? The way they pronounced her name was a hack job. I wouldn't recognize that was my name either.
Sorry, point of order.
Right, so-
No, sorry, I'm sorry. I think we have to call it point of order. We have to be careful with how we get involved with operational HR decisions. I think we're getting out of the scope of the line of appropriate questions. So I'll ask our legal counsel, Catherine Locker, if we're keeping in, are we still good here?
Things don't work.
Think that we're dancing very close to personal and personnel matters that are more appropriately dealt with in closed sessions or personally dealt with by operations. So I think we do have to be very careful. And I'm also cautious about using personal examples.
No, I
Because
understand.
this is a public
I
meeting, it's
understand.
being live streamed and it's available to the whole public.
Well, my child not on the board anymore, but yeah, okay, so those are just things that I was saying, trying to say, it needs to be in consideration because you're supporting a student and the support that you're putting in place isn't supporting a student and you're technically not supporting a student, is kind of my point. All right. Any further questions, comments? So number 12. Committee member motions for consideration. That we were. So, I had a motion to bring back, would that be here or the next? Or number 13, I don't know if it's 12 or 13. Where I would put that in. And I think.
General Counsel Locker, 12, yeah, we do it at 12. Thank you.
I'm also looking at the time, it's 9:30, do we have to, are you good still? Okay. So Mary Wright, I am the rep for Down Syndrome Association of Peel. And our last meeting, I was asked to rewrite a motion and present it to SEAC at this meeting. So I'm gonna submit a written copy of the motion. And then I will read the motion and then. Let's look at it from there. So. When parents and caregivers send their children to school, there is an expectation that their child will learn. There's also an expectation that the learning will be appropriately monitored to ensure the learning and growth of all students. The Peel District School Board employs a research development department that is responsible for tracking the progress and outcomes of mainstream students who obtain an OSSD with the prerequisites to apply to university and college programs. Unfortunately, this same intentional attention is denied to children with intellectual disabilities. Where do these students go when they graduate? Does the PDSB know the outcome for their most vulnerable student learners? No, they do not. Prior to the abrupt removal of the vocational level 2 program and the introduction of de-streaming, some special education who fell within the parameters of an intellectual disability would graduate with an OSSD, which gave them the prerequisite credits to attend diploma granting college programs. Some would enter the workforce upon graduation and some neither graduated nor entered the workforce. Unfortunately, the PDSB data that was made public was a graduation rate based solely on the OSSD. The data failed to track the outcomes that followed. For students in a vocational in vocational one level, working towards the OSSC, the outcomes were even less clear, as the vast majority of those students earning an OSSC did not continue with post-secondary education, and many have not gained the necessary skills for competitive employment. There is still no clarity about their post-PDSP outcomes. This is the same reality for those who earn a certificate of accomplishment and those who age out of the system in June of the year they turn 21 with less than 14 credits. Where do these students go after graduation? The unemployment rate for adults with an intellectual disability is 96% and 87% unemployment rate for adults with an autism diagnosis, StatsCan 2012. The average cost of an adult day program with a 5-to-1 support and Peel is $24,000 a year. For 1-to-1 support in Peel region, it ranges from $50,000 to $70,000 a year. The average funding that a family receives is $5,000 per year. By failing to take responsibility for tracking the learning and outcomes for students with intellectual disabilities, the PDSP is contributing to these dire statistics and to the strain caused by the financial realities. When we only track outcomes for students who graduate with an OSSD, we are moving on to post-secondary education. PDSP is sending a message that reveals who is prioritized and who is not. As a result, a two-tiered system is created that values one pathway, OSSD, over all others. If all students and pathways were equally prioritized, valued, outcomes would be equitably monitored. This would mean that all students who have clear pathways and supports with my blueprint, and there would be data to affirm that the programs offered to special education students, specifically those with intellectual disabilities, contribute to positive life outcomes after their time at this board is over. It is for this reason that the following motion is raised. Whereas some students, specifically, for example, students with intellectual disabilities, do not have linear pathway to post-secondary opportunities or pathways. And whereas some special education students, specifically students with intellectual disabilities with an OSSD, have the prerequisite credits to attend diploma granting programs, but the vast majority of those earning an OSSC do not continue their education post-secondary. Many have not gained the necessary skills for competitive employment. And whereas data made public is the graduation rate based on the OSSD, but not the outcomes post-secondary, therefore, be it resolved that the administration bring a report on the pathway of outcomes of special education students, specifically those with intellectual disabilities, receiving a certificate of achievement, a COA, Ontario Secondary School Certificate, OSSC, and an Ontario Secondary School Diploma, OSSD, with workplace level courses. And be it further resolved that the report include data on the direct correlation to these pathway outcomes and the programs delivered by the PDSP. There needs to be a change. The Peel District School Board must align their commitment to equity and inclusion to, in fact, include all students, specifically those with intellectual disabilities. Our most vulnerable students are entitled to equitable access to an education that demonstrates high expectations and models equal care and concern for their life outcomes. I'm not sure what to do after that, and we discussed it last meeting, so I don't know.
I think we put it on slower.
I think it was for the speed, because we already did that.
And I might need to get cleaned up a bit.
Thank you, through you, Chair. We'll get a seconder for your motion.
Can I get someone to second that? Wes McDonald?
And because there was awareness of this at last meeting, and this is just a refined version, the intent is the same. It's open on the floor to discuss this at this point. If there's any questions or comments, now's the time. It's on the floor. And then you can take a vote if the motion passes.
Okay. So do we have any questions, comments?
I have a question. So it might be a question for the administration, but in part of the preamble for this motion, we're discussing, where people go after high school. Where do they end up? I'm just wondering about that data, and I'm asking this genuinely. Like, I never reported back to my high school to fill that in. Can someone clarify that for me?
How does it work?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's the nature of the report. That's the motion that's being asked for. They're asking for a report back, and that information will come in the report. If that data is available, it'll be shown in the report. If it's not available, I'll tell you in the report. That's exactly what this motion is.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. That's definitely a clarification, because I was wondering, I'm personally unaware of how to capture that. Apart from many LinkedIn searches, but okay, thank you. That's all the questions I had.
So let's take a vote to receive the motion.
We already
To pass the motion, sorry.
That's all right, or how are we doing?
We gotta call for the vote.
It was just the raising of the hands,
Okay,
correct?
Yeah,
you gotta call.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have,
Okay.
there's a process.
All right, so all in favor to receive, to pass the motion. So I just read the motion, sorry.
But I would like to see a written copy of it.
Oh, Susan Zimmerman's got a question.
But not, this is not something that I can pass an opinion on right now.
Well, it's last month, you were here last month when we discussed it last month. And Associate Director Paul De Silva had suggested that we take away and be more specific as to the ask. Because the way that it was edited did not include intellectual disabilities. It had been removed for some reason. So I have rewrote the motion and included intellectual disabilities in several places.
But it would have been good for me to see that before I came to this meeting today. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I haven't had time to think about it. So.
Yeah, sure.
Well.
Thank you through your chair. So, and I think, I don't know, you're looking to legal governance for confirmation of this, but I think if you wanted that, you could ask for a motion to delay this to the next SEAC committee so that you would have time to review it if you were uncomfortable voting. I think that would be within the scope of possibilities. You would need someone to support that, and then there would have to be a vote on it. But if you felt uncomfortable voting at this moment, you could either not vote, abstain, or perhaps request for that delay. So I'm looking at Catherine, is that correct?
So I can ask for a motion to delay it until the next.
Yeah, you can absolutely ask. You'll need a seconder.
I would very much appreciate that.
Yeah, go for it. Motion on the floor through the chair.
Okay, so there's a motion to delay the accepting of it or the passing of this motion.
Instead of moving to approve it, although you have called the vote, so technically it will be difficult to bring a motion to defer, but we'll be cautious here. And do you have a seconder for your motion to defer it to the next meeting?
Do I have, I'm sorry?
You need a seconder if you're asking for a motion to defer.
Do I have a seconder or not? Anybody want to second it?
And I'll second it for you, but then it'll have to go to a vote. So I'm gonna second it out of the courtesy so that you can have your vote. There you go.
So a motion to defer the motion is on the floor. Are there any comments or questions in connection with the motion to defer? And it's your motion. You can speak to it first.
I couldn't hear everything that Mary was saying, so I don't know exactly what was in the motion. I would really like to see a written part of it. I mean, I know I support students with intellectual disabilities, but I'm not sure that I can concur with everything that you said.
Well, we're looking for some information, right? So they're just gonna bring back a report to us. We're not implementing any programming or anything like that. We're just looking for verification as to what happens to our students, like when they.
Perhaps when looking at the comments that Anne made, I think it's probably appropriate to have this discussion on this first, because I think probably that's been requested earlier in the next meeting, before it's put to a vote. I would support that motion to have it for discussion and vote in the next meeting, if that was asked. I think that's fair, and I would also want to read the motion myself, before I want to vote on it to be clear. So that to that extent, I would second the second and just support that we discuss and then vote on it in the next meeting.
So my comment is, this is gonna be like, the third month.
Yeah, we
That
keep
it's being
discussing it.
brought again, and
The same motion.
Yeah.
would, it's just, they're just asking for a report, and about what happens to kids who get an OSSC or a certificate of leaving, whatever, or who just age out, where do they go? It's just asking for a report as to whether or not the board, even if the report is, the board can't get this information, at least the board is coming,
Yeah.
what would be the next steps? It's not to make any particular, to suggest any particular changes, it's just to look at these kids with an equal eye, like we know if you get an OSSD that this many kids are going off to college and this many kids are going off to university and this many kids are not. But if they have an OSSC or.
We'll just get to the, sorry to interrupt, but we're just speaking to the deferral, not to the need of the motion.
And
So we
I'm
can't
saying,
actually
I don't
defer.
understand why we're deferring it.
Thank you for that comment in connection with the deferral.
Yeah.
We should call this for the vote.
Okay, so this is a vote to defer, is what we're doing right now. Okay, so all those in favor of deferring the motion till next month. Let's see a show of hands. 2. Okay. And then all those opposed to deferring the motion.
You got it.
Deferral is defeated. Okay, so the deferral is defeated.
So your main motion's back on the floor now.
Okay,
So if there's any further comments about the main motion, which is the request for the report back as Mary has read it. If there's no further questions, you can call for that.
Okay. So, I guess show of hands in favor of approving it?
No,
Approving the motion. Well, then, motion has been carried. Thank you. Alright. That is 12. All right. Okay, and I'll get you a copy of that. Actually, that's in. Number 13. Notices of motions and petitions.
I think I see. Oh, trustee Benjamin has her, oh, there's gone.
So no motions. And then number 14 is the action motion.
Through you, Chair, there are no new items on the motion action logs, and I will transfer the items from my oral report to the motion action log for next meeting as requested.
Jennifer next?
Sorry, there's no new ones from today, are you saying?
No.
Serve the budget, you're taking it.
There's new ones from today, but I'll respond to those next time.
Okay, sometimes we listen. Okay, that's all, thanks.
But there's no pending ones other than the ones I've answered, but I moved them forward.
Okay. So our final item on the agenda is adjournment. Anybody would like to vote for adjournment?
I'll second.
All right. Meeting is adjourned.
Okay.